We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing. I hope you're keeping well today. I'm Esther McVeigh and here's what's coming up. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will be our new Prime Minister come September. I'll talk to polling expert and Conservative peer Lord Hayward and to Conservative MP Mark Harper. Energy bills are set to rocket just as it gets cold and both candidates are being pressed to say how they'll help families. I'll talk to Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And over 18,000 people have crossed the channel illegally already this year. What can be done to stop it? I'll talk to our security editor and to Stephen Wolfe from the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. And following on from everyone's favourite mayor last week, Patrick the Pony, today we are proud to bring you the animal mayor of Amina in Michigan, Rosie the dog, and her full cabinet. You won't want to miss this. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews.
Good afternoon to you. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. 3 people have been taken to hospital following a suspected gas explosion in South London. The terraced home collapsed after the blast and neighbouring properties were damaged. A 4th person was treated at the scene. Neighbours said they'd help rescue 3 children from the rubble, but they fear a 4th child may still be trapped. Tory leadership hopeful Rishi Sunak has criticised his opponent's plan to bring tax cuts forward. Writing in The Sun, the former Chancellor said Liz Truss's measures won't touch the sides in helping families tackle the cost of living. Liz Truss says she wants an emergency budget next month so that the national insurance hike can be scrapped. She wants to see tax cuts immediately. Supporter of Truss and the former Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis, argues that tax cuts and inflation management aren't mutually exclusive.
What we want to do and what Liz Truss wants to do is get on top of and deal with the challenges that we're seeing with inflation, get inflation under control, but also be putting more money in people's pockets. Some people are arguing that you can do one or the other. It's just not the case. Actually, you can look at how you deal with inflation whilst also keeping a low tax economy.
The former Culture Secretary and Rishi Sunak supporter, Oliver Dowden, told GB News that dealing with inflation takes priority over tax cuts.
The first thing we've got to do is crush this scourge of inflation. That is at the root cause of all of this. And that's why, for example, Rishi was endorsed just last week by Nigel Lawson, one of the best chancellors we've ever had, who served under Margaret Thatcher, who understands the need to crush inflation first because it makes everyone poorer, and then to cut people's taxes for the long term.
The Shadow Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard told us that the Conservative government needs to act now to support vulnerable people.
There are already families struggling right now, already pensioners struggling right now. And if we don't see bolder measures taken now, not waiting until the autumn, then I fear we're going to see an increase in deprivation, increase in hunger, and more people turning off their heating in the winter months, which we know will only lead to more health problems and further pressure on an NHS that's already in crisis.
In some other news now, the Met Police strip searched 650 young people over a 2-year period. In a quarter of those cases, it was without an appropriate adult present. The figure's been condemned by children's charities. It was the Children's Commissioner who asked for the data after a 15-year-old schoolgirl who was on her period was strip searched after being wrongly suspected of carrying cannabis. Well, the data from Scotland Yard shows the hundreds of cases between 2018 and 2020 of those who were strip searched, more than 95% were boys. Former Met Superintendent Leroy Logan told us that toxic police culture led to this behaviour.
It seems like there's a culture of fear that even the good cops don't call out the bad cops, so carrying out their powers inappropriately and sometimes breaching the code of conduct. And that toxicity of it is creating so much trauma on the wider public, in particular young people.
The former Manchester United footballer Ryan Giggs is facing trial accused of assaulting and controlling his ex-girlfriend. The 48-year-old was surrounded by photographers as he arrived at court. It's alleged he used controlling and coercive behaviour against Kate Greville between August of 2017 and November of 2020. He's also charged with assaulting her younger sister, Emma Greville. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges. International news now, and the ceasefire between Israeli and Palestinian fighters in Gaza is holding after coming into effect late last night. Egyptian negotiators have been liaising with both sides to de-escalate tensions following a weekend of violence. There's been shelling from both sides after Israeli forces launched airstrikes against jihadist militants on Friday. Gaza officials say 44 Palestinians, almost half of them civilians, including children, have been killed. The United Nations Secretary-General has warned that an attack on Ukraine's nuclear plant is suicidal. Antonio Guterres said that the risk of a nuclear confrontation has returned after decades. He made the comments as reports emerged of renewed Russian shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility in Ukraine. Well, according to the Russian news agency Interfax this morning, the facility is operating as normal. Britain is bracing for another heatwave this week that could last longer than last month's record-breaking hot spell. The Met Office says temperatures won't hit the highs of over 40 degrees like last time, but they could reach up to 35. People have been urged not to host barbecues in the dry conditions, and the Environment Secretary is urging more water companies to impose hosepipe bans. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's go back to Esther for the briefing.
Thank you, Rosie. There's still 4 weeks of campaign until we find out who our next Prime Minister will be. So plenty of time for twists and turns. The Conservative membership, who of course get to choose, seem to hugely favour Liz Truss. But what does the wider public make of the two candidates? Well, let's talk now with Lord Robert Hayward, Conservative peer and polling analyst. Hello, Robert. Now, I have to say, you're like a one-man polling machine yourself, who has invariably got polling right, going right the way back to Margaret Thatcher and how many people were supporting her, whether she was going to remain leader, and to that 1992 general election right up to present day. So, is this polling right? Are we going to see Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister, or is it closer than people think?
Thank you for that wonderfully flattering introduction. I'll accept it from you.
Enjoy it. I don't give many flattering introductions out, so enjoy it.
The answer is, even the pollsters are uncertain about whether the polls are accurate. And Rishi's campaign team are saying very strongly the polls are not accurate. The people they're meeting are much more balanced than is the case, but probably with Liz's supporters in the lead. There are possible explanations. One was a regional bias, possibly in YouGov's polls, which YouGov have looked at very carefully and they can't see it. I discussed with one person from YouGov yesterday the possibility that, for example, if people have watched certain debates or alternatively they've met certain candidates at constituency hustings, are they more influenced? As yet, YouGov have not been able to look at those sorts of options. But I think there are a variety of explanations as to why both messages could be right, but probably are in direction showing that Liz Truss is in the lead, but not necessarily by the huge margins that some of the polls are showing.
I wonder, too, if there's still time for those polls to tighten or reverse, because what we're seeing in the papers today is that the public is preferring that by 64%, or 64% of them saying they want inflation tackled. Only 17% are wanting tax to come down. And that really is them supporting Rishi's policies rather than Liz's policies.
Oh, I think we'll hear a lot about that poll from Rishi and his supporters. There's no question about that. The inflation versus tax cuts is a very clear message from Rishi's team, Rishi himself, and that poll today is very helpful to him. But things have gone backwards and forwards. Yesterday, the Sunday Telegraph came out for Liz Truss, so that was a plus for her, as did some of the previous opponents, the other candidates for leadership. So I think there's also indications in the polls, or I don't think there are indications in the polls, that there are quite a lot of people undecided. And the hustings where the press have been present and they've asked people before the poll, before the debates, are they clear about which candidate they're going to support? There are, again, indications that a lot of people have yet to make their minds up. So I've got my vote here in my backpack. I shall vote at some stage in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But I think a lot of people have still to vote as well, because they're only just receiving the paperwork.
Why do you think that members are so undecided who they're going to vote for?
One of the key factors here is that Boris has dominated politics in a way that few politicians have, possibly since Margaret Thatcher, although Tony Blair may have fallen into the same category. And because Boris dominated politics, even people who are holding major offices of state, which both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have, they aren't as well known as they would under, shall I say, a more shy, retiring Prime Minister. And I think that's one of the key factors why even Tory party members are uncertain as to how they're going to vote.
Do you think party members are using the same criteria with which they're judging who the next leader will be? Because polls of the public will say that, you know, the cost of living is really important to them. 2/5 not thinking the government's taking it seriously enough. Are members taking the cost of living seriously enough?
No, I don't think they are. I think there is a difference in perception between party members and the public at large. And party members are looking at tax cuts because intrinsically that's where their inclination lies more than the public at large. But also party members, and you'll recognise this, Esther, from your part of the world, as other parts of the world, party members will also be thinking, who's going to get me elected when I stand next May or the May after or whenever it may happen to be? Now, the average member of the public is not interested in whether they're going to get elected or not. So there are a number of factors which will influence Tory members in a way that don't necessarily influence the public at large. But at the end of the day, Tory members looking over their shoulders as to how they're going to be elected or not elected at future contests will be saying, that's what the public want, I better bear that in mind.
Another thing, at the start of this leadership race, people were a bit concerned about blue-on-blue attacks, and would this have a negative impact on the Conservative Party as a whole? But I see a poll has come out by Techni UK putting the Conservatives up by 1% on 34% and Labour down by 1% on 39%. Can you explain that?
Yes, what's happened is Boris's departure marked a complete turnaround in people's voting habits. The Tories, the 4 or 5 weeks beforehand, and then the 4 or 5 months before that, were drifting downwards for the months, and then the last few weeks were falling quite rapidly. The announcement of Boris's departure has resulted in people returning to the Tory party brand Conservative. Now, blue-on-blue attacks, we see the similar process in America in terms of primaries and in France as well. Those sorts of attacks, yes, they hurt the party, absolutely no question about it. But in 2 years' time, when there's a general election, if the Labour Party have only got things that were said 2 years ago, i.e. now, to attack the Tory party on, then they're in a pretty weak position. They will, and the public will be judging on what the position is in the run-up to the general election, not what was said in the heat of the summer in 2022, when, after all said and done, a large proportion of the population are concentrating on their holidays and looking forward to issues in terms of cost of living, but not concentrating on a Tory party debate.
Robert Hayward, just a single word answer, if you can, for this final question. Will this race go to the wire? Is it too early to predict who the winner is going to be?
Without any certainty, yes, it is too early. It's a bit more than one word, but too early.
Nearly there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you very much indeed. So despite the 30-point lead, polls say that Liz Truss enjoys among the Tory membership. Rishi Sunak's team say things feel very different on the ground. And they've capitalised on Liz Truss's comments that she doesn't favour handouts to deal with the cost of living crisis. Let's talk now with Mark Harper, Conservative MP for the Forest of Dean and former Chief Whip. He is supporting Rishi Sunak to be the PM. So handouts seem to be the big debate at the moment. How are we going to support those who are most in need and whose policy has the most appeal? Is it Liz's cutting tax, or is it Rishi Sunak's with a more targeted approach?
Well, I think, Esther, good afternoon. The clear answer from voters, and that's, by the way, you've quoted the poll about voters. 2/3 of voters, 2/3 of Conservative voters, and actually nearly 60% of Conservative members think that we've got to focus on dealing with inflation. That's the thing that's the real priority for people, not delivering tax cuts now. Unfunded, permanent tax cuts, funded by borrowing from your kids and your grandkids to deliver tax cuts today, which is what Liz wants to do, is going to make inflation worse. And the big thing that people are going to be worried about from listening to the Bank of England last week is how are they going to pay their energy bills? And the fact is, we are going to need to give people direct help. The plan to reduce national insurance would give the Prime Minister a £1,810 tax cut. It would give someone working 35 hours a week on the national living wage a £59 tax cut, and it would give a pensioner zero. It simply doesn't work. And Liz ruled at the weekend in her interview, she said she wasn't in favour of giving out handouts. Now, I think we're going to need to give people direct help. Rishi thinks we're going to need to give people direct help, and I think people can look at his track record during the pandemic and they can see that he's somebody who'll have their back, who'll help use the power of government to get them through the winter. And I think that's what people want, to give them the peace of mind and the reassurance that they need as we deal with this massive challenge.
Saying this it seems to be what the public are agreeing with, dealing with inflation rather than tax cuts. So can you explain to me, since it seems significantly people are saying deal with inflation, that's what Rishi's saying, why he seems so far behind when his policies are appealing to people? What is it that he's doing wrong?
Well, I think it's two things. If you look at what the voters think, he's not behind. Actually, a lot of the polls of voters, including Conservative voters, actually think he's best placed to win. If I look at what voters who voted for us in 2019, who are currently not planning on voting for us, those key swing voters, he has a 20-point lead.
People who are going to choose, Mark, the people who are going to choose who the Prime Minister are the members who are voting. And in all the polls so far, he's behind. Why is that?
Well, I was listening to your conversation with Robert Hayward a second ago, and I think, look, part of the problem is this. The YouGov poll, for example, isn't weighted by geography. Our members are not evenly distributed across the country. 70% of them are in London and the south of England. So I just don't think those polls are accurate. I accept that Liz is probably ahead, narrowly, and so Rishi is coming from behind. I think that's right. There's a big chunk of our members yet to make up their mind, and a lot of our members still haven't actually had their ballot papers. So, like most elections, it's the undecided that will make the decision, and it's all to play for, and that's why Rishi is doing an enormous number of events this week with our members.
I'm smiling there because you're quite right. It's the undecided who always decide what goes on, and we frequently don't know who those are. I'm going to ask you a different question. This might seem like a personal question, but I believe there's tactics that the Liz Truss team is using to get supporters of Rishi to join her, saying, join us now and you'll get a job. Has anybody approached you from Liz's team to say, come over, move over, abandon Rishi? Is this happening? Is this true?
Well, no one's approached me, but I was the first person that publicly came out and supported Rishi when he launched his campaign. I back people based on principle, based on the policies that they're laying out. He's got the right policies for the challenges facing the country, and most importantly, he's got the right character. I talked about the pandemic. He was a new chancellor. We had a massive economic shock hit us when we shut the country down. I know lots of voters were terrified at the time about their jobs and their businesses, and he laid out in a matter of days, he got the Treasury machinery working, and he rolled out the furlough scheme, which saved millions of jobs and thousands of businesses. And I know a man that will have the voters back to get them through what will be a really tough winter, and that's why I'm supporting him, and that's why I'll be supporting him, and I hope to see him in Downing Street on the 6th of September.
And all the MPs in the House, significantly so, voted for Rishi, who was in the lead from the word go. Why do you think the other contenders in the competition, Nadine Zahawi, Penny Mordaunt, Suella, why do you think they've backed Liz rather than Rishi?
Well, unfair people would say that people looked at, I think you touched on it in your conversation with Robert, will have looked at the polls, worked out who they think is going to win, and back someone they think might give them a job. I, of course, wouldn't suggest such a thing. But look, Rishi got the largest number of MPs supporting him in that round. Those are the people that know the candidates the best. They've seen them in action up close. They've seen them making tough decisions. And that's why I think more of them gave him their support. And that's what I hope our members will do as they look at who's going to grapple with the challenges facing us. Our members want us to tackle inflation first, then get growth going, and then deliver sustainable tax cuts for the future. And that's the policy that Rishi is laying out for them. And I think that's why they'll choose him in the end. It's going to be a tough contest. He's going to fight for every vote, and I believe he can win.
Mark Harper, yes, Robert Hayward said it will go to the wire. So, Mark Harper, thanks for joining us today. So, we all see prices are going up, and as it gets colder, energy bills are set to rocket, leaving many worrying how they'll be able to pay for them. I'll talk to Helen Barnard, Deputy Director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, next about what help is needed. But before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. It's all about the blue skies this week. If you're after rain, and then unless you live in the far northwest, you're not going to see much this week. It's all about the temperatures as well, rising further through the week thanks to this area of high pressure. It's been moving in through the weekend, and it's going to stick around for most of this week. That exception will be that northwestern corner where this weather front will provide cloud and outbreaks of rain, certainly for the next day or so. Quite a damp day today over the Northern Highlands, the Western Isles and the Northern Isles. But elsewhere, yes, some patchy cloud, but most places seeing plenty of blue sky. And it is gradually just getting warmer day on day, widely into the low to mid 20s, maybe 28, 29 across the southeast. A little cooler on the eastern coast and obviously cooler with that thicker cloud and rain across the far north. May ease for a time over the highlands, the rain through the evening time, but then another area of rain pushing back into the highlands and the Western Isles through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, it stays dry and clear overnight. Not particularly warm nights, with temperatures holding up in the teens in some locations, but the nights are also going to get warmer as the week goes on. During tomorrow, again, a lot of cloud across northern Scotland, maybe some patchy rain across Aberdeenshire early on, but that should ease off and then skies will brighten, but staying fairly cloudy over the Highlands, the Western Isles. Not as much rain here. Maybe staying fairly damp across Shetland until quite late in the day. But otherwise, again, lots of blue sky and those temperatures a little bit higher, more widely into the mid-20s and possibly getting up to 30 Celsius across parts of the south. Again, some of the coasts, particularly the east coast, will be a little cooler with a bit more of a breeze coming in here. But staying fine and clear as we go through Tuesday night, and not a great deal of change really through the rest of this week with high pressure dominating. Look at that. Sunny skies for most through Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, and it is slowly going to get a bit hotter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 12:26 now. As energy prices could hit over £4,000 a year by January, there's increasing calls for the government to intervene further. Let's talk now with Helen Barden, the Associate Director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Research and Policy Director at Pro Bono Economics. Hello, really good to have you with us. So how bad do you think things are going to get?
I mean, I think it is now looking incredibly grim and fearful for a lot of people. So we did some work back in May to see how people were doing. And even then, we had about 7 million people who were going without essentials. So not being able to afford to have showers or eat properly, buy basic toiletries, those kinds of things. And we also have more than 4 million people already behind with bills in debt. And the average amount people are behind was £1,600. Now, that was all in May before we see the big price rises coming this autumn. So I think things are looking more and more difficult and frankly terrifying for people, particularly on low incomes who don't have savings, who don't have the kind of slack in their budgets to cut back on anything except essentials.
Mm-hmm. And what would you propose the best solutions are? What do you think we need to do, the government needs to do going forward?
I mean, I think we need to target help. When you've got a crisis of this magnitude, the government's right that they cannot protect everybody from everything. What they can do is prevent this leading to a wave of destitution across the country and also a wave of debt that will hang over people even when the crisis recedes. So we've got the benefit system, we have universal credit that was designed by a Conservative coalition government and put into place. So that's already actually identified who needs help and where you need to give people more help because they have children or disabilities and so on. So I think whoever is Prime Minister in the autumn is going to have to act and act fast, and actually raising benefits, bringing forward, for instance, the inflationary raise that you would get next year, bringing that forward to autumn would really, really help. There are smaller things, though, like the government is still knocking off deductions for debts from people's benefits. They could pause that while we're in this level of crisis, and that would really help people, because people can be losing anywhere between £50 and £140 a month to debt deductions. Pausing those isn't a massive additional cost for the government. It would make an enormous difference to people on low incomes.
And rightly so, you're focusing on people here on benefit and the lower paid, but these increases in fuel bills are so significant. It's going to impact everybody right up the wage scale, because invariably the more money that's coming in is invariably going out on mortgage payments or what have you. So we do need those support for the middle classes as well, going right the way through. So are you somebody who'd agree maybe in the tax reductions, removing VAT off fuel, maybe removing the green levy, so that we can help everybody across the board?
Well, I think you're right that there's that group in the middle, isn't there, who in normal times are doing fine, but haven't got enough kind of clearance in their incomes to sustain this level of rises. So I think you're right. I think the government will need to do something for those people in the middle. But again, I think that there are more and less targeted ways to do that. So, for instance, cutting national insurance for people who are the lower earners is a more efficient way than cutting income tax, where you do get people on really pretty high incomes who will notice the changes but are going to be able to cover these kinds of costs. I think that when you have a government facing this level of crisis, you need to be really targeted. So something like a VAT cut. VAT is only 5% of our bills. It's not going to make a real difference to people who need it. People who are doing fine are not going to notice, but it will cost billions. So I think that we need to be smart about this. And even for those in the middle, you can use national insurance as a way of helping them without spending billions of pounds on people who, frankly, will be okay. You know, if you look at what's happening to high earners, they are getting pay rises of 10%, for instance. Low earners are seeing pay rises of about 1%. So even in that middle, I think we need to focus on those who really need help and not spend billions on people who might not be able to have a second holiday this year, but are not looking at any serious hardship.
And Helen, I'm wondering too if there's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach here, because I look at job vacancies, and at the moment we've got record figures, 1.3 million job vacancies. So are we going to have to maybe help people, train people so they can take on that, or where maybe it's going to be a second job, so that businesses coming together with government, with the individual, to say, how do we get out of it? Because the gap is going to be too big maybe for just government to hand out in one way or another tax cuts or some form of benefit. So how about that, getting that training to get people maybe into extra jobs to support them?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think meeting this really immediate crisis, the government's going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But in the kind of medium and long term, you don't just solve this kind of thing with government action. And I think in terms of the labour market, so one of the trends we're seeing is an awful lot of people who have dropped out the labour market because of long-term health conditions. And quite a lot of that is around mental health. So I think one of the things we really need is better mental health support earlier, because it can be incredibly hard to get mental health support if you're not in total crisis, and even then sometimes. But also, I think there is going to be something about helping employers redesign some of their jobs to open them up to some of the people who have caring responsibilities or health conditions. That will make it hard for them to do a kind of traditionally designed job, but they absolutely can and want to work. So actually opening up some of these jobs to more flexible working can tap into a whole load of people who perhaps you're missing. The other thing is thinking about the role of civil society.
Helen
and
Barnard,
charities.
I think we're going to just bring it to an end, but I want to thank you very much indeed for the time that you've given us today. So thank you for joining us. Now, over 18,500 people have now crossed illegally into the UK on small boats so far this year. We'll discuss that next. But first, it's the news with Rosie.
It's 12:33. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. 3 people have been taken to hospital following a suspected gas explosion in South London. A terrace house collapsed in the blast and neighbouring properties were also damaged. A 4th person's been treated at the scene. Residents say they helped rescue 3 children from the rubble, but they fear a 4th child may still be trapped. Tory leadership hopeful Rishi Sunak has criticised his opponent's plan to introduce tax cuts immediately. Writing in The Sun, the former Chancellor said Liz Truss's measures won't touch the sides in helping families tackle the cost of living crisis. The Foreign Secretary says she wants an emergency budget next month so the national insurance hike can be scrapped. Former Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis, who's backing Liz Truss, says tax cuts and managing inflation aren't mutually exclusive.
What we want to do, and what Liz Truss wants to do, is get on top of and deal with the challenges that we're seeing with inflation, get inflation under control, but also be putting more money in people's pockets. Some people are arguing that you can do one or the other. It's just not the case. Actually, you can look at how you deal with inflation whilst also keeping a low tax economy.
The Met Police strip searched 650 young people over a 2-year period, and in a quarter of cases without an appropriate adult present. The data from Scotland Yard is from 2018 to 2020. More than 95% of those searched were boys. The Children's Commissioner asked for the data after a 15-year-old schoolgirl who was on her period was strip searched after being wrongly suspected of carrying cannabis. Another heatwave is on the horizon, and this next one is predicted to be longer than last month's record-breaking hot spell. The Met Office says temperatures won't hit the highs of 40 degrees like last time, but they could reach up to 35. People have been urged not to host barbecues in the dry conditions, and the Environment Secretary is urging more water companies to impose hosepipe bans. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things could have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 12:37 now. Despite government pledges, 18,500 people have crossed the Channel illegally this year, and we're only in early August. Let's talk now to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, and to Stephen Wolfe, Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. So, Mark, do you want to tell us what's happening, the latest figures now here in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, just over the last week, we've seen close to 2,000 who have crossed the English Channel. That's taken that total, according to our analysis, of just under 18,500. And we've seen, for the first time, it seems, a change in tactic by the French authorities on a beach near Calais. Now, this is an incident that unfolded at the weekend on Saturday, in fact, at Graveline's tourist resort between Calais and Dunkirk. You can see that boat on the beach. There was a group of migrants running towards the sea with that when an unmarked police car came up, and the police then set about puncturing that inflatable with a knife. After that, they then smashed up the outboard motor on the vessel. Now, people will probably be asking, why on earth have they not been doing that since day one? It seems like a very obvious tactic. If you want to stop an inflatable boat getting into the water, then puncture it. I think probably it's to do with the fact that clearly, as you could see there's 40, 50 people going on board these boats. Unless the police are there in significant numbers, then it might be a tactic that could backfire on them if those that were going into the sea decide to turn on the police. Having said that, I've been to Calais, I'm sure you've been there yourself, and to Dunkirk. There are police everywhere. They're in the vans, the CRS, their equivalent of the Public Order Riot Squad officers. So they're certainly there in numbers. I think it's probably a welcome tactic as far as many people are concerned, but not before time. I think a lot of people will be seeing.
There were two reports that came out from the Home Office earlier in this week, and one of them was by Alexander Downer, the longest-serving Foreign Secretary in Australia, who managed to sort of stop this or bring the numbers right down of illegal immigration. And he was saying you must do more with the French authorities, you must negotiate more, and there was another deal last week. Do you think this has made them slightly more robust on stopping those dinghies coming in across?
Well, the cynic in me might say that there is an announcement due soon in terms of a renewal of the payments that we are giving to the French authorities to bolster their presence on the beaches to stop these vessels going off in the first place. But yeah, you would like to think that perhaps there is more in the way of cooperation. I think Alexander Downer is absolutely right, though. Unless the French actually agree to take these people back when they arrive on UK shores through irregular means, then whatever anybody's doing, it really is just sort of prodding at a problem that is just getting bigger and more itchy all the time.
Yeah, and he said no stone should be left unturned. So that was taking immigrants to third-party countries. It was about turning boats back, and it was about dealings with France. So, Stephen, who are these people now coming over? I'm looking at the figures. It's more or less double to what it was last year. That's the increase. But who are these people coming over?
Well, the shocking report that we had over the weekend of that 4 in 10 of those who've come across in June and July of this year were Albanians is a wake-up call. Because what we're seeing is vast numbers of people coming from a country that people wouldn't regard as one where they're fleeing for fear and persecution. It's a country that's coming in or trying to apply to the European Union. It's where lots of people go on holidays. So we do know that. But we do have large numbers coming from Afghanistan, Iraq and Iran. And last year, on the research that we're doing, 10,555 people came from Iran, 8,000 came from Iraq, 7,000 come from Afghanistan. So we're getting the biggest countries, when you include Pakistan, from that region, which was the war region. But importantly, and this is really important, 80% of them are male between the ages of 18 and 59. So why are they leaving their families back in these countries? It's because they want to make a bridgehead in the United Kingdom, because under the ECHR rules, they're able to bring their family members across at a later stage.
And so you say that 75%, 80% of these are men coming over, paving the way. My question, because I always got told we couldn't necessarily say who these people were because they'll destroy the passports, they'll pretend they're not from that country at all. How have you managed to get so accurate figures?
Well, the Home Office have actually now produced a data set from 2001 to March of this year. And we've been looking at that over the last 3-4 weeks. It's a lot of work to break it down. They're not making it easy for us. They're not telling us which are the top countries. They're not giving us the amounts who come each year. And I'll give you a heads up. From what we will publish in September is so far 865,000 applicants for asylum since 2001. So that is their data. That ignores those who are escaping into the boats and not making applications, as we know happens. That ignores those who are coming across with the Albanians, who are slipping away, perhaps into criminality when we see the rising in numbers of Albanians in our court system and our prisons. So there is other numbers that are going to be there. And what we do need more clarity from the Home Office is actually really responding to our Freedom of Information request properly and accurately rather than hiding it. So we have to get these numbers secretly, as we did over the weekend.
Now that we know there's a significant number who are economic migrants, they're not asylum seekers, do you think the mood will change? Do you think where people have said it's the lefty lawyers, you know, having judicial reviews, the flight never went out there to Rwanda, were being not robust enough, do you think that might change people's views now and they might think the flights to Rwanda going to somewhere else where they can start a new life if they're economic migrants? Do you think the mood will change in the country?
I think the mood has already changed significantly, and that is why you've seen both the contenders for the leadership of the Conservative Party have come out with strong, robust, in their view, arguments for controlling immigration. Sunak and Truss have done so because they know that if they don't do so, they're going to lose those voters in the red wall who voted for Brexit, control of our borders, and are not seeing it happen in real time.
And Mark, a final question to you there. What is the cost at the moment of the country putting these people up in hotels accommodation? This is what the government's paying for at a time when the rest of the country is asking for extra support in the cost of living crisis.
Well, it's very significant. In terms of hotel accommodation alone, we were reporting back in April when the government announced the Rwanda policy and also that some of those asylum seekers would be housed at Linton-on-Ouse up in Yorkshire, that it was about 30,000 hotel rooms that were being requisitioned by the Home Office for use every single day. Well, since the Rwanda policy was announced, 10,000 more people have crossed the English Channel who will require housing. Now, not all of them will go into hotels, but thousands will. So that 5 million a day figure to house them will have increased by a fair degree, I would imagine. I don't know how much, but certainly could be pushing 6 million by now.
Mark White, Stephen Wood, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. So there are calls for new legislation to limit the number of second homes. In Cornwall, in some parts of the country, up to 60% of properties are either second homes or holiday lets. Cornish residents say it's forcing them out of their communities. Our Southwest of England reporter, Jeff Moody, went to meet one young musician who's determined to do something about it.
Meet Sam Richardson. He's lived in a small village on the north coast of Cornwall all his life. But his community is changing. Of the friends he grew up with, he's the only one left.
Second home, second home, second home. 2 more second homes up there around the corner. There's a new one being built up there. You can see them blasting out areas of the cliff.
It feels to Sam they're blasting out the very community itself. Almost half of the houses here are second homes. Where once Sam's friends lived and loved, empty windows now stare out at quietening streets. And here's the problem. People come down here on holiday. They see a gorgeous pub, they see a shop with gifts. They think, I know, I'll buy a house nearby. But then they come here 2 or 3 times a year. And before they know it, the pub's had to shut and so's the shop.
But when the winter comes, so many of these places have got to close because they just can't pay the bills through the winter because there's not enough people here.
And with businesses disappearing and less homes to go round, The feeling is Cornwall is no longer for the Cornish.
It's the fact as well for me that they've had to leave to make way for second homes. For people that are, living out of county. It's kind of, it almost destroys a lot of the living history that we still have here. It's quite heartbreaking.
Sam's written a song about it, and his voice speaks for people across the West Country, forced to migrate east. But it doesn't have to be this way. Sam wants councils to cap the number of second homes to give Cornish communities a fighting chance of survival. I put his idea to MP Steve Double. Steve has ideas too.
One of the ways is having some sort of licensing scheme so that the local authority can manage the number in any given area, or potentially looking at requiring change of use on planning.
Another option, increasing the amount of council tax due on second homes. Plans were in place, but last week they were kicked into the long grass. The government says it's in consultation to find a way out, but for Sam, talk is cheap.
I see government blaming local councils and councils blaming local government. We don't want blame, we want action. We want actual, real moves to make a difference. Because the reality is that people are struggling, and they're struggling more than they've ever struggled. I don't really care whose fault it is. I want a solution now.
Cornish people are angry. This second home was graffitied, allegedly by a pensioner. That anger is heating up like the August sun. But so's the problem, and neither looks to be cooling off anytime soon. Jeff Moody, GB News.
The Tory leadership race continues with the two candidates clashing over the response to the cost of living. Former Northern Ireland Secretary and Liz Truss-Bacher spoke to GB News earlier today.
Putting more money in people's pockets for some time, with her opponents saying that's fairy tale stuff, when actually we need to help people. We need to get on with doing that now, not waiting a few years to see what we can do. And Liz has been leading the way on that and continues to be in the space that she wants to have an emergency budget, get money in people's pockets now to deal with the challenges that people are seeing. Well, because I think Liz has outlined she wants to do this the right way. She wants to move quickly if she becomes Prime Minister. She wants to have an emergency budget, and obviously an emergency budget would deal with these very issues. What she's setting out at the moment is that overarching set of principles that will guide her as Prime Minister and whoever her Chancellor is, which is to have a low tax economy, so more money for people who are paying tax to be able to spend in the way they see fit to deal with these challenges, but also to have one that's based on a high wage and high productivity economy. So we're seeing more jobs created for people that even in the short term can make quite a big difference to the security that people have in their homes. I think Liz has led the way in trying to talk about how we make sure we're getting more money in people's pockets. But look, it's a very fair challenge. The reality is these things are not mutually exclusive. What we want to do and what Liz Truss wants to do is get on top of and deal with the challenges that we're seeing with inflation, get inflation under control, but also be putting more money in people's pockets. Some people are arguing that you can do one or the other. It's just not the case. Actually, you can look at how you deal with inflation whilst also keeping a low tax economy. As I say to that, one is the current Chancellor I know is focused on this, and even while he's been out of the country has been having daily meetings and conversations with his team around what we're doing. But also I could assure you, when you talk about the energy levels of Liz Truss are absolutely bubbling high. She is very determined to carry on the work for people, both as Foreign Secretary, also through this leadership campaign. And I've known Liz a very long time. I've seen the amount of energy she's got. If she's made Prime Minister in September, she will hit the ground running. She'll have all the energy she needs to deliver for people across the United Kingdom.
That's Brandon Lewis there. Now, last week, Rishi Sunak, in leaked video, admitted that as Chancellor, he funnelled money from deprived urban areas. Former Conservative Party chairman Oliver Dowden, who is backing Rishi Sunak, spoke to GB News about this earlier today.
Well, actually, I'm finding, as we go up and down the country, having conversations with members, they're hearing Rishi's message. And I think particularly after the very grave warnings that we heard from the Bank of England yesterday about the future direction of the economy, about the scourge of inflation, they understand that Rishi Sunak is somebody with the skills and the experience to deal with this. And crucially, they understand the first thing we've got to do is crush this scourge of inflation. That is at the root cause of all of this. And that's why, for example, Rishi was endorsed just last week by Nigel Lawson, one of the best chancellors we've ever had, who served under Margaret Thatcher, who understands the need to crush inflation first because it makes makes everyone poorer, and then to cut people's taxes for the long term. Say it's a great attribute of Rishi's that he's incredibly hard-working. I've had the honour of working with 3 previous prime ministers and many people at the top of government. I've never known someone work so hard, and I think you'll see from Rishi, if he is elected leader of the Conservative Party and prime minister, somebody who brings that hard work, passion and commitment to the nation. As for that video, I think he was actually making an important point. And under the Labour years, money was just shoveled into inner city areas on the basis those were deprived, without understanding there is deprivation across our country. Just take my own constituency of Hertsmere. It has some very wealthy areas, but also it has a ward that is in the top 10% of poorest wards in the whole country. Deprivation exists outside the big northern cities, and I think that's the point that Rishi was making, that we need to make sure that we get those resources to where the actual need is, and not accept formulas that we inherited from Labour. Understand that we need to make sure that we get those resources to where they're needed, and for too long Labour had taken a blanket approach and ignored those areas of deprivation in London, in the wider southeast of England and other suburban areas. It's really important that we help all parts of the country if we're committed to levelling up.
That was Oliver Dowden there. So thanks for getting in touch today. Gareth says, why are you not blaming our left-wing lawyers for stopping all attempts by the government to halt this invasion? I think I did bring up lefty lawyers. Linda says, why are we paying £5 million a day if we can't afford to look after our own people? Why are the government ignoring illegal immigrants? Why has Priti Patel not been sacked? Harsh there. And Margaret says, if the government can give handouts costing billions, how come they can't do tax cuts? Where is the money coming from? And Halson says, bring back Boris. He will sort it out. We are in a limbo. Those were your thoughts today. Thank you for sending them in. But before we go, you might have noticed it's August and Parliament is in recess, even though there's lots of politics going on. And here on The Briefing, we make absolutely no apology whatsoever for our final news item of the programme. We are proud to bring you the Animal Cabinet of the town of Amina in Michigan. First up, it's Mayor Rosie, who beat back all challengers to be elected the Mayor of Amina. Forget tax breaks, Rosie's flagship policy is tick vaccines for humans. And her deputy, First Vice Mayor Penny. Penny is a chicken and she's campaigning for comprehensive education reform. Her favourite food is mealworms. And our personal favourite, the second Vice Mayor of Amina, is the unbelievably named Sweet Tart McKee. Her favourite food is pate, especially salmon, and her signature policy is more mice. And finally, a special mention for Press Secretary Sandy. She's currently under some pressure to resign in Amina following allegations, which she denies, that she broke into a sheep pen and ate all the feed. More on that as we get it. Well, you've been watching The Briefing with me, Esther McVeigh. Next up, it's Mark Longhurst with On the Money.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. It's all about the blue skies this week. If you're after rain, and then unless you live in the far northwest, you're not going to see much this week. It's all about the temperatures as well, rising further through the week thanks to this area of high pressure. It's been moving in through the weekend and it's going to stick around for most of this week. That exception will be that northwestern corner where this weather front will provide cloud and outbreaks of rain, certainly for the next day or so. Quite a damp day today over the Northern Highlands, the Western Isles and the Northern Isles. But elsewhere, yes, some patchy cloud, but most places seeing plenty of blue sky. And it is gradually just getting warmer day on day, widely into the low to mid-20s, maybe 28, 29 across the southeast. A little cooler on the eastern coast and obviously cooler with that thicker cloud and rain across the far north. May ease for a time over the highlands, the rain through the evening time, but then another area of rain pushing back into the highlands and the Western Isles through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, it stays dry and clear overnight. Not particularly warm nights, with temperatures holding up in the teens in some locations, but the nights are also going to get warmer as the week goes on. During tomorrow, again, a lot of cloud across northern Scotland, maybe some patchy rain across Aberdeenshire early on, but that should ease off and then skies will brighten, but staying fairly cloudy over the Highlands, the Western Isles. Not as much rain here. maybe staying fairly damp across Shetland until quite late in the day. But otherwise, again, lots of blue sky and those temperatures a little bit higher, more widely into the mid-20s and possibly getting up to 30 Celsius across parts of the south. Again, some of the coasts, particularly the east coast, will be a little cooler with a bit more of a breeze coming in here. But staying fine and clear as we go through Tuesday night, and not a great deal of change really through the rest of this week with high pressure dominating. Look at that. Sunny skies for most through Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, and it is slowly going to get a bit hotter.